The 19th century French novelist Honoré de Balzac is often quoted as saying, "Behind every great fortune lies a great crime." And you know what? Were Balzac to still be alive today, I think we can all agree that he would insist that the greatest of crimes is being committed every single day. You know it, and I know it too. It is why it isn't uncommon to hear people casually walking a "eat the rich" response when we are met with news of inequality. To have a few people, a 1%, if you will, hoard that amount of wealth when millions, billions of people are starving, unable to access healthcare, are facing homelessness, it is disgusting. So disgusting that it should always make you justifiably hangry. Which is why fuck Billionaires is the third fuckathon prompt. For those who are curious about what on earth the fuckathon is, no, it is not some sex thing. It is instead a readathon or a reading challenge that I created about 5 years ago, where from July 1st to July 31st, we read books based off of prompts that address present societal issues, so we can be more knowledgeable and justifiably angry about them and have the information needed to take that shit down. And as I do every year, I am creating a recommendation list of possible books you can consider reading in July to fulfill the listed prompts. That is why this video exists. I will leave the announcement video for this year's Fuckathon in the description bar, and if you look at the Fuckathon playlist, you'll be able to see all the previous recommendations, particularly for this year's prompts. Now that we have that out of the way, let's get started on the recommendations. Since I already started this video by talking about why we should all be justifiably angry at the fact that 1% of the world's populations are the one hoarding all this wealth, then it only makes sense that the first book on the list is 99 to 1, How Wealth Inequality is Wrecking the World and What We Can Do About It by Chuck Collins. Chuck Collins is someone who has spent the past 2 decades working to educate the general public about the dangers of extreme income and wealth inequalities. And in 99 to 1, he paints quite the vivid and stark picture of US and global inequalities, going beyond just individuals amassing a vile amount of wealth, which is already terrible as is, to showing what role it plays in our social values. The political power that is wielded and the economic policies that have led to the current state of extreme inequality that we face today as a people. I find this book particularly pertinent because in Nigeria, for example, we have the man who is considered the richest person on the continent, Aliko Dangote, and he's worth $13.7 billion. Now, if you're American or someone living in the global north, I'm pretty sure you probably just thought, no, yeah, he at least isn't as bad as Smell on Mustard, whose net worth now sits as $215.6 billion. And honestly, I get it. That is a ridiculous amount of money. I get it. But the minimum wage in Nigeria is 30,000 naira. That's less than $20 a month. You heard that right. Minimum wage in Nigeria sits at $18.75 a month. And this motherfucker is worth $13.7 billion. It is a travesty of the highest order. The 1% has 35.6% of all private wealth. That is more than the bottom 95% combined. The 1% has 42.4% of all financial wealth. That is more than the bottom 97% combined. Between 1983 and 2009, over 40% of all wealth gains flowed to the 1% and 82% of wealth gains went to the top 5%. The bottom 60% lost wealth over the exact same period. 99 to 1 is a book that is filled with data that calls on us to collectively ask ourselves what we care about, what we need, and how wealth inequalities have damaged everything we care about. It calls on us to see very clearly how it's quite a negligible few who are causing this irrevocable harm with their hoarding of wealth. It shows us that corporations and businesses and governments and policies all play a role in this disparity. And finally, it reminds us that these inequalities are reversible. Unfortunately, none of his suggestions involve eating the rich, but he does give some valid policy suggestions and changes, and how we can create a movement to change the conditions that are worsening inequality in the world around us, kind of similar to what was done after the first Gilded Age. A good read. If you want a book that gives you further insight into how talks about free markets and capitalist interest and pulling yourself by the bootstraps, and my personal favorite, The American Dream, and how all of these are buzzwords, because that is what they are. Buzzwords that are tailored to serve only the interests of a select few who have amassed such an incredible and, quite frankly, disturbing amount of wealth, and by extension power, which in turn they use to manipulate democracies and the systems within which they operate, then you absolutely must pick up The Trouble with Billionaires: Why Too Much Money at the Top is Bad for Everyone by Linda McQuaig and Neil Brooks, which is such a brilliant book that drills what some would consider a complex topic. Nobody really likes talking about how much the system is set against the 99% in our endless struggle to make enough money to survive and make ends meet. They drill it down into the most simple, easy to grasp way. The 1% get rich by skirting the rules, bending the laws and democracies, and by also collecting the rewards of not just the work they put in, but the work of others too. The trouble with billionaires, unlike the previous book 99 to 1, which spoke to global inequalities but gave particular focus to the US, also speaks to global inequalities but gives special attention to the UK, showing a scale of just how much the UK economy has been fucked over by the top 1%, whose share of total income rose from around 6% in the mid-1970s to over 15% by the time of the credit crunch. It is appalling. And the author calls for us all to look within our economic systems and trace the lines of how we are all being collectively fucked over. The only ones who seem to not be fucked over, according to their data and research in the books, are Scandinavian countries, which makes me extra curious. Now, I know that a large percentage of my viewers and subscribers live in the US, UK, and Canada, but if you live in any of the Scandinavian countries, please let me know if Linda and Neil are right. Drop it in the comments. If they are right, however, wow. You lucky bastards. The third book on the list is a step away from the first two non-fiction books I've mentioned. If you follow these recommendations videos that have been releasing for the last 5 years, then you know that I like to give a good mix of fiction and non-fiction to keep things balanced. And before you ask, no, I did not include any billionaire romances on this list. It's fuck billionaires in a eat the rich kind of way, not actually fuck them in a sexual way. At least not for this particular prompt. But yes, back to the third book on the list, which is Birnam Wood by Eleanor Catton, a high-stakes thriller that takes place in New Zealand, where a landslide has closed off parts of the country, to be precise, the town of Thorndyke, and its very sizable farm, which the conservationist, anti-capitalist, anti-establishment activist group Birnam Wood find and decide it would be a great place for them to plant their collective plant crops. Unfortunately, the farmland also attracts the attention of American billionaire Robert Lemoyne, who is as intrigued by Mira, the group's founder, as he is by the group itself. Now, before you think for a minute that this will turn romantic, remember this is a thriller, this is a fuck billionaires prompt, so don't. What you will instead get is a book that will have you curious about what the hell Robert Lemoyne's deal is, because he does have a deal. There is an hidden agenda he's pursuing that you will attempt to figure out, just as you will want to guess whether or not Birnam Wood can attempt to come into partnership with Lemoyne's schemes. If you keep the prompt in mind, you already know the answers to this. But if you do want the thriller set in New Zealand that further shows how utterly vile and shite billionaires are, then this might just be the book for you. But if you don't want to explore how the truly wealthy play fast and loose with nature and talks on conservationism from a fictional perspective, but want something that is more true to life and reality, then might I present Billionaire Wilderness, the ultra-wealthy and the remaking of the American West by Justin Farrell, a Yale professor and native Wyomingite, who by virtue of the class elevation of being a Yale professor and his native roots in Wyoming, was able to spend 5 years in Tenton County in Wyoming, the richest county in the United States with the worst income inequality in the country, and is just perfectly representative of the vast difference between the 1% and the 99%. Justin was able to conduct hundreds of in-depth interviews and discussions with tech CEOs, oil magnates, prominent figures in business and politics, and Wall Street financiers. And he also interviews the rural poor, the ones who work for this ultra-wealthy of American society and who live amongst them, and were able to give unique commentary on how they lived. It was, after all, the poor amongst the ultra-wealthy who makes their nature-loving lifestyles possible through the work they did for them in services, construction, and caretaking. Through the interview with these workers, Justin is able to show us how rural poverty is being romanticized, whilst the wealthy profit off of nature conservatism, both financially and socially. Socially, because it's become very altruistic to be positioned as being one for environmental conservation, with people not being able to see beyond that veneer to what it is at its root. Self-serving philanthropy that increases inequality, perpetuates gilded consumption, and reinforces the current economic systems that exist today, in a way that he calls connoisseur conservation. Now, COVID saw a lot of families hit in the worst possible way, medically and financially speaking. People lost their jobs, some people got to work from home but at a much lower wage than what they had previously been paid. Everybody seemed to take a hit. Except billionaires. Their stocks, their investments, their wealth just seemed to skyrocket in a way that if you paid attention to the trends, you would have found very peculiar and quite worrying. If you are that person, then you might consider reading Davos Man, How the Billionaires Devoured the World by Peter S. Goodman. The Davos man or woman, as coined by political scientist Samuel P. Huntington, are the rich and powerful of the world who are often out of touch, but most of all representative of the global elite. They have little need for national loyalty, view national boundaries as obstacles that thankfully are vanishing, and see national governments as residues from the past whose only useful function is to facilitate the elite's global operations. In Davos Man, How the Billionaires Devoured the World, Peter Goodman shows us the very tricky game of sleight of hand that the world's richest performed to increase their coffers and boost their portfolio. The book focused on Jeff Bezos, Mark Benioff, Jamie Dimon, Steve Schwarzman, and Larry Fink, and the monopolistic empires they grew, all whilst trying to use philanthropy and public relations to try and whitewash their images in the public, so the full scale and scope of their atrocities cannot even possibly be conceived by the public. As someone who is aware of how Bill Gates does that, right here in my country using the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, it is egregious. Billionaires exploiting loopholes so they can avoid contributing to the common good. Instead, they donate to political campaigns and lobby world governments so they can avoid paying taxes, which has brought devastating results on the citizenry of countries the world over. I will once again use my country's top billionaire, Aliko Dangote, as an example, who just finished building a private, keyword here being private refinery, using a loan he got from the Nigerian Central Bank, except that he got the loans at the most ridiculous rate. Also, our central bank converted his naira into dollars, basically sold him dollars at half the market price. And now that he has completed building the private refinery, guess who is buying the oil mined from Nigeria at a cheap rate so he can sell us being the country, refined oil back at global rates? Like, I need to take several breaths. And you need to add Davos Man, How Billionaires Devoured the World by Peter S. Goodman to your TBR. If however you want a book that reads more like a melodrama with a dystopian feel, because let's be real, look at the world we're in right now and tell me it doesn't feel particularly dystopian. But as I was saying, if you are convinced that tech billionaires are surely leading the world to its end, then might I suggest you consider The Future by Naomi Alderman, a fast-paced high-tech thriller where the world's billionaires have built bunkers to separate themselves from the rest of us plebeians and have gotten so high on their own self-importance that they've created a system where they basically control everything. And smack dab in the middle of this are two main characters, Martha Icon, who fled her preacher father's apocalyptic preaching cult, and Lizen, an internet famous survivalist who has assassins after her because clearly someone wants her dead, until she's saved by a mysterious app. And now Martha and Lizen have to work together and try and survive a world that is hurtling its way to its end and fight their damnedest to keep that from happening. I'm not going to go into further details because this is definitely a book you don't want to be spoiled on. The next book on the list brings us back to reality and is the result of 5 years of conducted interviews, poring over public records, private papers, and court proceedings to take us through a long trail of billions of dollars that have been spent to influence the American government to favor certain oligarchs. I am of course referring to Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right by Jane Meyer. If you've always wondered about the hold that Charles and David Koch have over the American government, if you're curious about the vast array of organizations in which they have their fingers and toes, also they can influence a wide swath of American society, from academic institutions to think tanks to courts, state houses, Congress, and the American presidency, all to further their own goals, and which has pushed the country further and further to the right, then this is the book for you. In addition to the coaches, Dark Money also details the dealing of Richard Mellon Scaife of Mellon Banking, Oil and Aluminium. Then there's John M. Olin, the Bradley Brothers, and the Devos and Coors Families Foundations. If you want to know how dark the money goes and how wide a net it casts, then you should pick up this book. If, however, you would rather pick up a comic, most precisely a horror satirical comic that follows a billionaire who, surprise, surprise, is the villain of the story, then consider Rumpus Room by Mark Russell and Ramon Rosanas, where we follow our villain, Bob Shrunk, a billionaire with a skin condition that gives his face a scaly reptilian appearance, which one could infer is most likely an allusion to his cold-blooded nature. Why do I say so? Well, it's because to hide his condition, Bob Shrunk uses a facial cream that is not available over the counter and which is instead made of human bodies that are crushed and turned into skin cream. Yes, you heard that right. To protect his vanity and hide his reptilian looking skin, Shrunk spends the comic kidnapping people, locking them up in his Rumpus Room, where he forces them to choose which one of them will die next in a democratic farce. And of course, there's a cop on the case how to catch his ass. Fuck the police, but not in this case. If you like horror comics, then definitely add Rumpus Room to your list. If you'd rather hear from a Nobel Prize winning economist, however, then turn to The Price of Inequality, How Today's Divided Society Endangers Our Future by Joseph E. Stiglitz. Being an economist, we already get the foreknowledge that Joseph is most likely for capitalism, which but the book is a well-researched presentation of how the top 1% in America have crippled growth, distorted policy, fermented a divided society, all for the end goal of compounding their own wealth. It's an expose on the effect of inequality on the country's democracy, on its justice system, and basically how distorted policies, namely monetary, budgetary, and globalization, have contributed further to this inequality. He, of course, prefers a vision of a much better, prosperous future where dynamic capitalism can be made to work for the American people and transform America into the land of opportunity it is meant to be. Poor Joseph. Alas, hope springs eternal. But away from Joseph and his hope that capitalism is a system that will ever work when the 1% still exists, let's move to someone a bit more fictional, because there's no way I would talk about billionaires and not talk about the ultimate billionaire villain, Lex Luthor, CEO of LexCorp, the billionaire pain in Superman's side. Now, I'm pretty sure if you're a comic buff, you probably weren't all Noria's about to mention Lex Luthor, Man of Steel, which is a pretty fantastic comic. But I'd like to put you on another comic, Lex Luthor, the Unauthorized Biography by James D. Unnall and illustrated by Eduardo Barreto, which gives us more of a characterization of Lex from the 1980s when he was cruel and manipulative and bent on power and world domination. The comic is set like a crime noir fiction piece, and we follow Peter Sands, who is a down-on-his-luck reporter and desperately in search of a win. And this win, it decides, will be a biography that he chooses to write on Lex Luthor. Power-hungry and world domination-driven Lex Luthor. Let's just say things don't end well for Peter. If you like comics with really amazing art and aren't attached to the idea of Lex Luthor as some sort of misunderstood anti-hero who has a sliver of goodness in him, remember, this is the 1980s Lex, then consider picking this up. Now, back to our non-fiction recommendation. If you've always been curious about the people, the entire systems behind billionaires that helps them navigate their wealth and get away with what they can steal, these agents of inequalities are just as key in contributing immensely to the inequality present in today's society. If you're curious about that, then look at the next book on the list, The Wealth Hoarders, How Billionaires Pay Millions to Hide Trillions by Chuck Collins. If you just went, Chuck Collins, why does that name sound familiar? It's because Chuck wrote 99 to 1, which was the first book on this list. And Chuck takes us further into this world of inequalities created by the 1%, who hire a network of tax attorneys, accountants, and wealth managers who are all part of this shadowy wealth defense industry. Yes, you heard that right. They tag themselves as part of the wealth defense industry because just the thought of having to ethically distribute wealth in the way that is expected and proper is an anathema to them. Disgusting. Even more disgusting is the fact that billionaires pay these agents of inequality millions to hide their trillions and further entrench hereditary dynasties of wealth and power. If you've always been curious and are ready to be pissed as fuck about the length wealth hoarders would employ the wealth defense industry to go to help them get away with their money, then this is the book for you. If, however, you have your tongue far up a billionaire's ass and about to come into my comments talking about how, well, it's justified, why should their money be taken? We need to be more realistic about taxing the rich. Shut the fuck up. You will never make the amount of money that they have, no matter how far up their ass you stick your mouth. The system is rigged against you. You won't be that rich. Nobody should be that rich. It is an odious existence. Oh, and I will block your ass. But yes, if The Wealth Order sounds right up your alley, then do consider picking it up. If everything I've just said has you pissed enough to wish that we had the actual Punisher in our world, then don't worry, you can have that satisfaction in the satirical comic Billionaire Island by Mark Russell, illustrated by Steve Pugh, colored by Chris Chokri, and with Bob Steen as the letterer. Billionaire Island is a 13-book comic series where we experience a post-apocalyptic world where the world's top 1% have retreated to Billionaire Island, also referred to as Freedom Unlimited, a mobile island where, from the name of the island, you've probably guessed what it's about. They have unlimited freedom to do as they want without any thought of repercussions or being meted out to them by the riffraff 99% who have been left behind. The man, the brain behind Freedom Unlimited, Ricanto, doesn't mind even committing some egregious crime because, as far as he's concerned, is merely executing a form of population control. Who cares if his plans lead to an outbreak of Ebola? Well, the soldier whose family were murdered from the poisoned food Rick sent might have a couple of things to say about that and has a big axe to grind, Frank Castle style. So if you love The Punisher and believe really that we should eat the rich, then this comic series might be just the one for you. If, however, you would prefer your graphic novel give you an exploration of our world's billionaires, then consider Billionaires, The Lives of the Rich and Powerful by Daryl Cunningham, which focuses on 4 key American billionaires who have their fingers and toes and entire body in the US private sector. Union-busting piece of shit Jeff Bezos, evil incarnate Rupert Murdoch, and the brothers and evil spawns, Charles and David Koch. Sorry, can you all tell how much I hate this man? Daryl Cunningham, however, does give a very unbiased analysis of these 4 men, how they gained their wealth, the lies and bullshits we've been fed about their self-made origins. None of them are self-made. None of the world's billionaires are self-made in the true sense of the word, if we're being honest. But back to the 4 horsemen of capitalism. Charles and Davis's father cemented his wealth with his refineries that fueled Nazi Germany. Rupert Murdoch basically thrives and grows richer with the fear-mongering his control over the media landscape makes possible. And then there's Jeff and how he went about acquiring everything and everyone and systematically driving off his competition whilst treating his staff like utter shite. Daryl Cunningham shows us how the myth of free markets and how it operates keeps wreaking havoc on the earth and the most vulnerable members of our population. If you like brilliant research, a ton of fact speaking, with a good sense of humor to help balance all the rage you would feel with reading this, then do consider Billionaires, The Lives of the Rich and Powerful. Or you could consider the psychological thriller that is The Perfect Wife by J.P. Delaney, where we follow Abby, who wakes up in a hospital bed with her mind a complete blank. She doesn't know where she is or how she got there or who the man by her side who says he's her husband is. It tells her that she's a gifted artist, that she's the most loving wife and mother to their son, that she is the perfect wife, and that she was in a terrible accident 5 years prior and only just woke up thanks to the marvels and a breakthrough in science. The only thing she knows about him though is that he's a tech mogul, the founder of one of Silicon Valley's most innovative startups, and that it is quite clear that he is keeping a big secret from her about what really happened and whether or not she's truly been with him for as long as he says. Now, I'm not going to go into further detail because that does spoil the twist of the story, but if what I've said so far has you intrigued, then consider picking up The Perfect Wife. Now, anytime conversation arises about my second favorite phrase after eat the rich, can you guess what it is? Tax the rich, of course. Anyway, anytime conversations rise about taxing the rich, the response we always get is how taxing the rich is this complicated situation and there's a lot of thoughts that have to go into it, and is it fair, blah blah blah. Well, Maurice Pearl, the former BlackRock executive and chair of the Patriotic Millionaires, and Erica Payne, who is the founder of the organization, tell us how to do just that in Tax the Rich, How Lies, Loophole and Lobbyists Make the Rich Even Richer. It's a book that brilliantly takes apart any sort of justification, intellectual or otherwise, that has been put into place to try and get Americans to stick to the US tax code, which the truly rich have had in their control and have been manipulating for decades to their own benefit. But now you have someone who was previously one of their own who has turned class traitor and is revealing all their secrets and points out that the present tax code as it exists does nothing but guarantees inequality and by extension social unrest. Together, Maurice and Erica share actual reforms that can be put into place to start to unravel and even up the wealth inequality as it exists today. If you would instead prefer a work of speculative science fiction, then maybe Kill the Rich by Jack Allison and Kate Shapiro might be more your cup of tea. The book takes place in 2038 America that has become this heavily policed and surveillance state where everything has been privatized and sold with very little freedom, and corporations rule the day with their own mercenary groups. The Dems and Republicans have unified into a single unit, and the world is that gif where Donald Glover steps into a room, pizza box in hand, and everything is on fire. And in the midst of it all is Smell-on Mustard. What? Did you think his face on the cover of the book was a coincidence? Nope. This is a satirical story, and Smell-on wants to assassinate the US president on the charge of being a communist. And we have our heroes who are determined to stop his chronically online ass. If this sounds like a catastrophic mess, but your own kind of catastrophic mess, then maybe consider picking this up. If instead you'd prefer a short story, one that is considered a practical classic, then maybe look at The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell, illustrated by Dennis Liel, and first published in 1924. In just 48 pages, The Most Dangerous Game tells us about big game hunting expert, Sandra Rainsford, who falls off his yacht in the Caribbean and finds himself washing up to the island that General Zaroff currently resides on, with his ginormous servant, Ivan. Zaroff, who is a big fan of Sandra's work, decides that he is bored with the game and animals he's been hunting and decides that he's about ready to start hunting people, starting with Rainsford. And we basically end up getting this hunting fiasco between two extremely wealthy people, with one of them being bored and jobless as fuck. It is witty, it is intelligent, it is fantastic. If you haven't read it yet, maybe July might be a great time for you to reconsider and get it. Or you can get Billionaire's Ball, Gluttony and Hubris in an Age of Epic Inequality by Linda McQuaig and Neil Brooks. If those names sound familiar, it is because they wrote the second book on this list, The Problem with Billionaires. As I'm sure you've probably already guessed at this point, Linda McQuaig and Neil Brooks have a problem with billionaires and wealth inequality, which rightfully so. And in Billionaire's Ball, Linda and Neil basically help to further remove that curtain from the bullshit lies that society likes to feed us, lies about how billionaires earn their money. They didn't. In their book, through profiles of billionaires like Bill Gates, the Koch brothers, Steven Schwarzman and others, they are able to show us that it isn't through hard work that the 1% made their way to the top and grew their incomes by 403% between 1980 and 2008, compared to the mega 1% increase in income of America's bottom 90%. Instead, they show us that it's all thanks to a legal and economic system that they've manipulated and twisted to suit themselves and enrich themselves, and it is a system that is now very actively threatening the quality of life of others the world over and democracy as it's meant to exist. They show the economic gluttony that drives the 1% and how it is well on the road to dooming us all. And then we have the penultimate book on the list, which is Stieg Larsson's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. If that just made you draw back in confusion, because what? Well, it's more because of the big bad, the villain of the story, which I'm sure it's all I needed to say for it to click for you. I'm of course talking about Martin Vangar, the rapist, sadistic, psychopathic piece of shit villain of the story, who is protected by his family's immense wealth. If you haven't read The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and you've had it on your TBR and own a copy of it, then this might be the reading challenge to get you to pull it out and get to reading. I'm not going to go into any further details because I think everyone and their mother have talked about the books and movies at this point. But yes, fuck Martin Vangar. And finally, the last book on the list, Limitarianism, the Case Against Extreme Wealth by the Dutch political philosopher Ingrid Robbins. The reason why I made the effort to point out that Ingrid is a political philosopher is because what she offers us as a solution to wealth inequality and disparities is a philosophical one. A push that we as a society limit just how much wealth a person can accrue. It seems like a wild dream, I know, but it really is the only way to solve the gaping wealth inequality. Ingrid postulates that limitarianism calls for 3 kinds of actions for it to be most effective. Structural action, where people are genuinely given equal opportunity through things like affordable childcare, free, high-quality education, and a comprehensive anti-poverty strategy. The next action is fiscal, which is taxation of 100% that is thus placed as a way to discourage wealth hoarding and push for an imposition of a cap on the amount of wealth that individuals can accrue. And finally, there's the ethical action of limitarianism, which basically speaks to us collectively embracing limitarianism as our ethos. It sounds like wishful thinking, I'm sure, to a lot of you all watching me right now, but you know what? I don't mind if we work from a wishful thinking into a system that would work, because the wealth inequalities as they stand today, as they stand right now, cannot be allowed to continue. It will spell doom for us all. But yes, those are 20 books that definitely fit the Eat the Rich, Fuck Billionaires prompt for the Fuckathon. Did any of them catch your eye? Are you interested in reading on any of them? Let me know in the comments. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much. Please take a moment to like this video. My recommendation videos tend to take a lot from me. Subscribe if you aren't here. Share this video if you found it helpful. It helps grow my channel and is incredibly supportive of my content. Speaking of support, a huge thank you to my patrons. You all keep me going and help keep the lights on. Thank you so much. If you would like to support me on Patreon, the link to my Patreon is in the description bar. I make new videos 3 times a week. Mondays are my anime manga content days. Wednesdays are for movies and TV shows, and Fridays are my Noria can post anything she wants days. This can be something bookish, more TV show, movie content, something on video games. The sky is the limit, really. All my videos drop at 5 p.m. EST, so do keep that in mind. Until my next video, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.